Paris in the 1920s was a hotbed for new ideas about art and literature. Painter Joan Miró was distinguished among a group of artists who would define a style of art called surrealism. They challenged rational thought, combining real and fantasy images on their canvases. Born 100 years ago in Barcelona, Spain, Joan Miró infused his strong Catalan spirit into all of his work. To celebrate the anniversary, the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, has mounted the most comprehensive retrospective of the artist's work ever undertaken. Joining me now are Carolyn Lanchner, a curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at MoMA, and the curator of this exhibition, also Joan Miró, the artist's grandson. He is currently studying art history at New York University. I also should take note of this. This is the heaviest book I've had this week, Carolyn, but this is your book, which in fact is I guess everything you ever wanted to know about Joan Miró.
Probably a great deal more.
and maybe more. First, and when you think about great exhibitions at your place at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art here in New York, you think about Picasso and you think about Matisse. Is Miró in that pantheon?
Well, I'm somewhat at a loss exactly how to respond to that, because I'd rather not make it an issue of
Comparison.
major,
Okay.
minor.
Okay.
I think the most interesting and the most and rewarding way of looking at any artist is to think about what that artist has contributed to his or her time. And in that sense, Miró is very definitely up there with anyone.
Okay, so answer the question, what did and what has Miró contributed to the times?
I think that he has changed the way we look at the world around us. There is no question that he changed the way artists think about how they can make a painting. He literally invented a whole new kind of pictorial spatiality with the so-called dream paintings made between mid-1925 and mid-1927. I mean, we are now so used to the idea of color field painting, it's hard to think about how extraordinarily radical those pictures were when they were introduced.
Okay. I only like to do this because this is a book by, in part, where the co-author is Joan Miró. But what's interesting about the book, if I may do this, is just to show these photographs. Can you come in here a little bit? I just want to, it's interesting to me not only to see the photographs, but also see the painter that we're talking about. All right, can you see that? Come on in for me. There you go. You might want to just say a few things about, tell me about your grandfather. Give me a kind of personal sense of this man and what Barcelona meant to him.
Barcelona meant to him the capital of Catalonian art. But at the same time, I have to say that I know Miró not as a painter, not as an artist, and not either as a genius.
Yeah.
I know him for 15 years as my granddaddy,
Yeah.
and that really makes a big difference. I know Miró as a simple man that was completely beyond some kind of familiar sense of household. He was beyond his own tasks at home. He was always close within himself, a extremely private and above all modest human being.
Mm.
And that somehow played a great role on my life too. That changed a lot of things.
He died, what, how long? He died in what, 10 years ago?
10 years ago, that's right.
Yeah, and he was what, 9? No, he was 90.
90.
This is 100, it would be 100, born in 1893. How many paintings in the exhibit? No, let me, forget that question. You're the curator,
Yes.
you know, and you've been given this opportunity by the Museum of Modern Art to produce this important retrospective.
Yeah.
How long does it take to do it? Where do you get the paintings? Because I was in someone's home recently who had one of the Matisse paintings that was in the Matisse
Right.
exhibit, and I thought, wow, I mean, you know, for a country boy from North Carolina, this was damn impressive. Tell me how you go about putting a retrospective together, and what do you want to say, and how much is too much? Because one criticism, not a criticism, one comment said that sometimes for a great artist, you don't have to have everything that artist has done, because some of it, in some cases, too much detracts.
Well, to try to take in segments your various questions.
You don't have to embarrass me.
I'm sorry, with no intention to so do.
Go ahead.
It took about 3.5 years. I think any project of this scope takes about that long, and it's it's just too difficult, too complex to really describe, and it would bore everyone to tears, or some parts
But you
of
call
it
up
would.
every museum and every private collector that you know that has a major work, and you try to figure out if you can get it.
You try to find out where everything is that you're interested in. You go look at them, then you try to convince the collector that the project is worthwhile.
Did you meet any failure in convincing someone that who said, I don't care, I'm not giving up?
Well, it's inevitable that you will meet a failure or two or three
right,
or four,
right.
but we had remarkably few on this exhibition. I mean, we're very, very fortunate in the responses we got, and one of the most extraordinary things, of course, is that as the image on the cover is one of 23 tiny gouache paintings. Well, they're not so tiny, but they're small.
Can you come to this, guys, as we look? Yeah, go ahead.
All the same size. As I said, 23 of them, which Miro very specifically wanted to have brought together and arranged chronologically. He said, this is how you can follow my development. It was never done until this exhibition, and I mention it simply because it's an example of how lucky we were.
Yeah. He, as a painter, he was very studied and careful and what?
Well, there's two sides of Miro, very pronounced two sides.
Okay.
He was obsessively methodical in the way he went around about making his art, and at the same time, the art itself, the product of that obsession and that obsessive kind of way of working, is the paradigm for all that is free and spontaneous in the art of this century. If abstract expressionism has an root, it's certainly in Miró.
How did he define himself? I mean, what was his own sense of where he stood?
I don't know that he was excessively concerned with where he stood in terms of history. I think where he wanted to stand was at that place where he could produce the most expressive art of which he was capable. That would stand up against the art of the ages.
During the latter part of his latter years, some notion that he wasn't, that work is not as good as the earlier work.
Well, I think that's come about largely because in those late years, well, for one thing, people tend to forget that there was a whole period between 1950 and 1960 where he painted very little.
Is this when he went into doing other things?
He did a lot of ceramics,
Right.
a lot of sculpture,
Right.
and an enormous amount of printmaking. And I think that the prints that come from that period have come to be seen as a sort of signature Miró, which they are not. It's but a facet of the way he worked. And it was sort of the sheer amount of those prints that has tended to skew people's views of Miró.
What was his relationship to Picasso?
They were friends. Miró not only liked him, he admired him. He met him the first time he went to Paris in 1920. Picasso was enormously supportive and also acquired within a year or less of meeting Miró 2 of his paintings, which are now in the Musée Picasso in Paris. That is to say, they're at the Museum of Modern Art at the moment.
Museum of Modern Art, right.
Normally, that's where they are. And I can think of one anecdote about them, which Miró himself told. At one point in the early years in Paris, when he was feeling extremely discouraged and like he was just getting nowhere, and he went to see Picasso, and Picasso said, get online, wait your turn, just pretend you're waiting for the subway.
Right.
And Miró seemed to like that a lot.
Yeah, that his time would come.
Yes, which indeed it did very, very shortly thereafter.
Define surrealism for me in a sense.
I always find it should be a very easy question.
I know it should. And
I never find it that easy. Surrealism really was much more a literary movement than a movement in the visual arts. The visual arts sort of got annexed to it by Breton, who in fact referred to painting as a lamentable expedient. Mm-hmm. But that comes about largely because the surrealist ideal was a process, or at least in its early years, of free association, whereby the practicing surrealist writer, it would also extend, of course, to painter, would, by a process of hallucination or by dreaming or something, get at the depths of the subconscious, the irrational, which was surreal, more real than reality itself.
Right.
And this necessarily without aesthetic goals. Now, you can't paint without some aesthetic goals, so there was an incompatibility from the very beginning between the theory of surrealism and the practice in terms of painting.
Before we go to the paintings, we've got 6 slides here. Tell me what his legacy is for you as his grandson, beyond the personal, but also personal and also his place in art.
I have to say that
You're a young student.
being the grandson of Miró is something that has given me lots of pride at the same time, because I see a man that has been able to achieve what he wanted to achieve from the very beginning. When he was 7 years old, he told his father, "I have been born to be a painter," and he indeed succeeded in that. We have to understand at the same time that there were lots of different things going on at the time in history when he was around that really make lots of trouble in his art and life. And I think that being able to overcome all these barriers, overcome all the troubles, overcome all those impediments to be able to go on in life and succeed was something that really made a big crash on me and gave me lots of influence to be able to go on and give you a reason to be.
Yeah. Let me take a look at these. First is 1918, I think it was, Standing Nude. Carolyn, tell me about this. There it is.
I find this an amazing picture. It's startling even now. It was done at an early period of Miro's life, before he'd gone to Paris. And most artists at their beginnings paint in what I might call a sort of generic way. That is to say, before the artist is capable of taking fragments of inherited tradition and putting them together in a new way, in his own expressive voice, that painter paints within the tradition he finds in place. I mean, an early Picasso, an early Matisse, an early Miro, you can exchange with an early who knows who, so long as it was a competent painter. But what distinguishes Miró, I think, or one of the things it does, is that he so aggressively wants to get out of that generic way of painting, so that here he's painting this before he's found his own new means of expression. So what he does is he takes a very traditional subject, the standing nude, in an exotic interior, and jolts her with a sort of dash of cubism and a huge dollop of Matisse. In other words, makes incompatible styles cohabit in a sort of flaunting of any notion of good taste, and nonetheless coming together to make a very powerful presence.
Only because of time.
Sorry.
No. This is the one that most famous to me, The Farm. Tell me about The Farm.
Well,
what he was trying to say and what he did say.
I would like to say less about this, if I may, and have Juanito say something, since this is a place you know very well.
Yeah.
It's not because this farm was bought by Joan Miró's parents in 1910, and he was always pretty much attached to the nature of Catalonia on the east side coast of Barcelona. And what he really wanted to say with this painting was to show all the sources of energy that he received from nature. He always said, I have to be away working throughout the world, for example, in Paris or in Barcelona, but he has always to go back to nature to nourish himself.
Yeah, now, Hemingway bought this early on, didn't he?
Very early on. He wasn't, as is usually supposed, the absolute original owner, but close on.
Yeah, right. And who owns it now?
The National Gallery. It was bequeathed to them by Mary Hemingway.
Okay. Next slide, The Hunter. This is 1923, 1924. Some sense of the...
Well,
this is another well-known...
I mean, this picture is, I think you can pinpoint this picture as the breakthrough picture in Miro's oeuvre. Up until this point, he worked before nature, from looking at perceived reality. At this point, he moves into the realm of the imagination.
Roll next slide. This is part of the famous Dream series that you mentioned earlier. Tell me about it.
When I was talking about a new kind of pictorial spatiality before, this is specifically what I was talking about, the kind of monochromatic field of luminous color over which just the very schematic drawing floats. It's a kind of space that looks almost metaphysical, but in a certain way is really the analog of the space we live in, immersed in it.
Okay. The next slide is from the Constellation series, which I mentioned, which sort of was a very productive period, 1940, 1941.
Yeah.
You know, go ahead. Set it in its context of its time and tell me why it's important.
Well, of these 23, the first was made in January of 1940, the 23rd in September of 1941, so done over a nearly 2-year period, during which the circumstances of Miro's life were harrowing, in a sense. He made the first 10 in Vangeville-sur-Mer, where he was, that was in Normandy, because he felt that he was then living in exile in France, afraid to go back to Spain because of Franco. Right. But he was in Normandy because he thought that there he and his family would be safe from German attack. Well, the Germans attacked through Flanders, and Miró had to flee through France. They opted to return to Spain, even though they weren't sure what kind of reception they would get. Indeed, they went, instead of going to Barcelona, where they were warned not to go, they went to Palma, and Miró for some time used his mother's family name, Farah. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Instead of his own better-known name.
Okay. Let me take this last slide and talk. This is untitled 1970 to one of his last works.
Well, again, if I could defer to Juanito, who I've heard talk about this painting.
Yeah, I like to talk about this painting very much because it emphasizes a lot the importance that the last period of his life had throughout his entire literary development. In 1980, 1979, he was by himself, living in Mallorca. I was even barely able to see him at home. Why? Very simple, because he had always the obsession of working until the last day of his entire life.
Obsession with working.
Definitely. He had a complete dialogue with painting that nobody was able to interrupt. And that was something that became an obsession, specifically at the last time of his career. And I remember very well one day that he wrote a piece of paper saying, "Now that I cannot work, I want to die." And that was something that I cannot get out of my mind. Because what kind of person can say this? When I'll be 65, you know what I will think? I say, now I'm retired. I don't want to work anymore. These kind of people that make changes, like Martin Luther King and the civil rights, Kennedy, the president, all these big or the biggest, these people really make radical changes through conception of living, making changes through conception of his entire fields, music, arts, president, politics. These people really make changes. And life is nothing with work. Work, work, work.
Life is nothing without work.
Without work.
Yeah, right. Let me finally, the legacy that he has and the fact that somehow exhibitions in the United States have made a real, what they did for his career.
What exhibitions in the United States did for his career? I think they were very important to it. Partially for political reasons and partially just for reasons of a greater awareness here. Miró was celebrated earlier in the United States, became attractive to collectors and to museums far earlier than he did in Europe. In fact, put in a plug for the Museum of Modern Art. We gave Miró in 1941 his first museum retrospective. So that's also redounded to our benefit. The benefit of this exhibition, in that there is so much of Miró in the United States that it made it somewhat easier to borrow than if you're asking people to lend something across an ocean.
I've mentioned his legacy a couple of times and also the impact he had. If you had in a word to sort of sum up this achievement.
Without the space that he literally invented in the dream paintings, it is very, very hard to conceive of this whole area that we refer to as color field painting. Maybe it would have been there anyway, but it wouldn't have had this early sanction that comes from Miró.
Sanction and definition.
Yeah.
Great to have you. Thank you very much for coming. Well, nice to meet you. What you said about obsession rings because those words were heard recently in this broadcast by Anthony Hopkins, the actor, talking about the obsession of artists, creative artists of all kinds. The Museum of Modern Art will be there through January 11th, am I right?
Yeah.
January 11th, the 278 combination of ceramics and painting?
Yeah. Close.
Close?
Yeah.
More than 278, less than 278? Or?
On the main 2 floors of the exhibition, there are 298 or 9 works. And then there is a separate print section upstairs.
Well, you certainly should know. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope many people will go see the exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York City through January 11th. Thank you for joining us this evening. See you next time.